The summer heat was unbearable that day in August 1887. The sun beat down on the Montana ranch like it had a personal grudge against anything living. Thomas Holloway wiped the sweat from his forehead as he walked toward the old barn at the edge of the property. He'd been working on this ranch for 3 years now, saving every penny he could. Life was simple but honest. Wake up before sunrise, work until your body ached, sleep, and do it all over again. He was heading to the barn to grab some tools when he heard it. A soft sound like someone trying very hard not to cry. Thomas stopped in his tracks. His hand instinctively went to his side, though he wasn't carrying a weapon. The barn was supposed to be empty. Everyone was out in the fields or tending to the livestock. Walking slowly around the corner of the barn, Thomas found her. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, was curled up behind a stack of old hay bales. Her dress was torn and dirty, like she'd been traveling through rough country. But what made Thomas's heart sink were the bruises. Dark purple marks covered her arms and one side of her face was swollen. Her lip was split and dried blood stained her collar. She looked up at him with eyes full of terror. The kind of fear that comes from expecting the worst from every person you meet. Thomas raised both hands slowly, the way you'd approach a frightened animal. "Easy now," he said softly. "I'm not gonna hurt you." The woman pressed herself harder against the barn wall, clutching a small leather bag to her chest, like it was the only thing she owned in this world. Maybe it was. Thomas took a step back, giving her space. "You look like you could use some water. And maybe some food. When's the last time you ate something?" She didn't answer, just stared at him with those wide, frightened eyes. Thomas noticed her clothes weren't the simple cotton dresses that farm women wore. The fabric was finer, though now it was ruined. Whoever she was, she came from somewhere with money, which made the bruises even more troubling. "My name's Thomas," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "I work here on this ranch. Been here 3 years. Never hurt a soul in my life, and I don't plan to start now." Still no response, but he could see her shoulders starting to relax just a tiny bit. That was something. "Look, I'm gonna go get you some water and maybe some bread. I'll leave it right here and then I'll go back to work. You don't have to talk to me. You don't have to tell me nothing, but you look like you've been through hell, and the least I can do is make sure you don't die of thirst behind this barn. Would that be all right?" After a long moment, the woman gave the smallest nod. Thomas felt something shift in his chest. He'd always been the kind of man who minded his own business. Ranch life taught you that. You didn't ask questions, didn't get involved in other people's troubles. But looking at this bruised, terrified woman, he knew he couldn't just walk away. He went to the bunkhouse and grabbed his canteen, a hunk of bread, some cheese, and an apple from his own supplies. When he returned, she was still there, though she looked ready to run at any second. Thomas set the food down about 6 feet away from her. "There you go. Take your time." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. It was barely a whisper, rough like she hadn't used it in days. "Thank you." Thomas looked back. She was reaching for the canteen with a shaking hand. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then said, "Grace." "Well, Grace, you're safe here. Nobody's gonna hurt you while I'm around." Something flickered in her eyes. Not quite trust, but maybe the possibility of it. She unscrewed the canteen and drank deeply, water spilling down her chin. Then she tore into the bread like she was starving. She probably was. Thomas watched her for a moment, his mind racing. She was running from something, someone. The bruises told that story clearly enough, and whoever gave her those marks might come looking for her. That could mean trouble for the ranch, for Mr. Peterson who owned the place, for everyone. The smart thing would be to tell her to move along. Point her toward the next town and wash his hands of it. That's what most men would do. It wasn't his problem, but Thomas had been raised by his uncle after his parents died. His uncle had taught him one thing above all else. You help people who need helping even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient. "Grace," he said, making a decision that would change everything. "There's a loft up in this barn. It's just hay and old equipment, but it's dry and nobody goes up there much. You could stay there for a bit, just until you figure out what you want to do next." She looked at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. "Why would you help me?" "You don't know me," Thomas shrugged. "Don't need to know you to see you need help. But I won't force nothing on you. If you want to move on, that's your choice. But if you need a safe place to rest for a few days, that loft is yours." Grace stared at him for a long moment, studying his face like she was trying to read his soul. Finally, she nodded. Just for a few days, she whispered. Just for a few days, Thomas agreed. He showed her the ladder to the loft, then brought her a blanket and promised to bring more food in the evening. As he walked back to his work, Thomas wondered what he'd just gotten himself into. He was just a ranch hand trying to save up for his own piece of land someday. He didn't need complications, but when he looked back at the barn and thought about those frightened eyes, he knew he'd made the right choice. Whatever Grace was running from, whatever trouble might follow her, he'd deal with it when it came. That evening, Thomas brought her a plate of stew from the ranch kitchen, telling the cook he was extra hungry. Grace ate it slowly this time, with more dignity. Some of the fear had left her eyes. "How long have you been running?" Thomas asked, sitting at the bottom of the ladder, giving her space. 4 days, she said quietly. Walked mostly at night. Hid during the day. That's a long time to be alone and scared. Grace didn't respond to that. Instead, she asked, "You really work here? This isn't your ranch?" "Nope, belongs to Mr. Peterson. I'm just hired help. But he's a good man. Fair, honest. Will you tell him about me?" Thomas considered this. "Not unless I have to. But Grace, if someone comes looking for you, I can't lie to him. He's been good to me." She nodded, understanding. "I hope nobody comes." "Me too," Thomas said. As he left her that night, Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He'd spent so long just working, saving, planning for a future that felt far away. But now, protecting this mysterious bruised woman felt like the most important thing he'd ever done. He didn't know her story yet, didn't know what demons she was running from. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt her again. Not while he had breath in his body. The stars were bright that night as Thomas lay in his bunk. Through the window, he could see the outline of the barn. Somewhere up in that loft, Grace was probably lying awake too, wondering if she'd made the right choice to trust him. Time would tell if either of them knew what they were doing, but for now she was safe, and that was enough. The next morning, Thomas woke up before dawn like always, but this time his first thought wasn't about the horses or the fence that needed mending. It was about Grace. Was she still in the loft? Had she run during the night? Would she even be there when he checked? He went about his morning routine, trying to act normal. The last thing he needed was the other ranch hands asking questions. After breakfast, he grabbed some biscuits and bacon, wrapped them in a cloth, and headed to the barn like he had work to do there. When he climbed up to the loft, Grace was awake, sitting with her back against a wooden beam. She looked better than yesterday. The swelling on her face had gone down a bit, though the bruises looked darker now. "Morning," Thomas said, offering her the food. "Figured you'd be hungry." "You don't have to keep feeding me," Grace said, but she took the food anyway. Her stomach was probably doing the talking for her. "I know I don't have to. Want to." They sat in silence while she ate. Thomas pretended to be sorting through some old tools, giving her space but staying nearby. After a while, Grace spoke up. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Thomas stopped what he was doing. It was a fair question. "My uncle raised me after my parents died. I was about 7. He always said that when you see someone in trouble, you help. Simple as that. Don't need a reason beyond someone needing help." Grace nodded slowly, processing this. "Your uncle sounds like a good man." "He was. Died 5 years back. Heart just gave out one day." Thomas felt the familiar pang of loss but pushed through it. "What about your family?" Grace's face darkened. She was quiet for so long that Thomas thought she wouldn't answer. Then she started talking, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mother died when I was young. Fever took her. After that, it was just me and my father. He was different after she died. Started drinking. Started gambling." She paused, her hands gripping the cloth that had held the food. "He got himself into debt, bad debt. The kind you can't pay back with money." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. He had a feeling he knew where this was going. "There's a man named Victor Blackwood. Owns half the county where I'm from. Rich, powerful, used to getting whatever he wants. My father owed him money. A lot of money. So they made a deal." Her voice cracked. "He sold me. Like I was property? Like I was a horse or a piece of land." The anger that flashed through Thomas was hot and immediate. He'd seen some bad things in his life, but this kind of cruelty toward your own daughter made his blood boil. "Blackwood wanted a wife," Grace continued. "Someone young and pretty to show off. Someone he could control. When I refused, when I said I wouldn't marry him," she touched her bruised cheek. "He said he'd teach me obedience." "Locked me in a room. Said he'd break me however long it took." "How did you get away?" Thomas asked, his voice rough with emotion. Storm came through, thunder and lightning like you wouldn't believe. Everyone was distracted. I'd been working on the window lock for days with a hairpin. Finally got it open. Climbed out, jumped from the second floor. Twisted my ankle, but I didn't care. Just ran. She looked at Thomas with eyes that had seen too much. Walked for 2 nights straight. Hid during the days. I just kept thinking, get far away. Get somewhere he can't find you. Thomas wanted to say something comforting, but what could you say to someone who'd been through that? Instead, he said what he was thinking. "You're brave. What you did, escaping like that, keeping yourself alive, that takes real courage." Grace laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "I don't feel brave. I feel scared all the time. What if he finds me? What if my father tells him which way I went? What if he won't find you here?" Thomas said firmly. "I promise you that." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Thomas would bring Grace food 3 times a day, always making sure nobody saw him. He brought her fresh water for washing, clean clothes that had belonged to Mr. Peterson's late daughter, and even some books to help pass the time. During these visits, they talked. Really talked. Thomas told her about his dreams of owning his own ranch someday, about the land he'd been saving up for. He talked about his parents, the little he remembered of them. His mother's laugh, his father's strong hands, the way they'd loved each other. Grace talked about her life before everything fell apart. She'd loved reading and gardening. She used to help the cook make bread every morning. Her mother had taught her to sew, and she'd been quite good at it. There was a person underneath all that fear and pain, and slowly, Thomas got to see glimpses of who she really was. But he also noticed things he didn't talk about, the way she flinched if he moved too quickly, how she always positioned herself near the loft's edge, ready to run if she needed to, the nightmares that must wake her, based on the dark circles under her eyes. One evening, about a week after he'd found her, Thomas brought up dinner and found Grace standing near the loft's small window, looking out at the sunset. The golden light made her look different, softer, peaceful almost. "It's beautiful here," she said without turning around. Quiet. I'd forgotten what quiet felt like. Thomas walked over to stand beside her, careful to keep some distance. "It's why I love this place. Out here life's simple. You work hard, you're honest, and that's enough." "Do you ever get lonely?" Grace asked, surprising him with the question. He thought about it. "Sometimes. But I always figured I'd meet someone eventually, when the time was right. When I had my own land and could actually offer something to a partner." "That's very practical," Grace said, and he thought he heard a smile in her voice. "Yeah, well, that's me. Practical to a fault." He paused. "What about you? Before all this, did you ever think about what you wanted your life to look like?" Grace was quiet for a long moment. "I wanted what my parents had. Before my mother died. They loved each other. Really loved each other. You could see it in how they looked at each other, how they worked together. I wanted that. Someone who'd choose me. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to." Something shifted in the air between them. Thomas felt it like a physical thing. This connection forming. He'd only known Grace for a week, but it felt longer. Deeper. Like his soul recognized something in her. "You'll find that," Thomas said quietly. "Someone who sees how strong you are. How brave. Someone who will protect you and stand beside you." Grace turned to look at him, then really look at him. "You think so?" "I know so." What Thomas didn't say, couldn't say yet, was that he was starting to think he might want to be that person. But it was too soon. She was still healing, still scared. The last thing she needed was him complicating things with feelings she might not return. That night, as Thomas lay in his bunk again, he stared at the ceiling and admitted the truth to himself. He was falling for Grace. For her strength, her kindness despite everything she'd been through, the way she smiled when she forgot to be scared. It was crazy. He barely knew her. But the heart doesn't always follow logic. He'd keep it to himself for now. Let her heal. Let her feel safe. And if the time ever came when she could see him as more than just the cowboy who helped her, well, that would be a gift he didn't deserve but would cherish forever. Outside, the night was clear and cool. In the barn loft, Grace was probably looking at the same stars, maybe thinking her own thoughts about the quiet cowboy who'd saved her life. Neither of them knew it yet, but they were both thinking about the same thing. About possibility, about hope, about the chance that maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all this pain. 2 weeks had passed since Thomas found Grace behind the barn. 2 weeks of quiet mornings and evening conversations. 2 weeks of watching her slowly come back to life, like a flower that had been trampled but found the strength to bloom again. Thomas was mucking out the horse stalls when he heard the sound of hooves. 3 riders coming up the main path to the ranch house. Something about the way they rode made his instincts kick in. These weren't friendly visitors. He dropped his shovel and walked toward the ranch house, staying close enough to hear but trying not to look too interested. Mr. Peterson came out onto the porch, and Thomas's stomach dropped when he got a good look at the men. They were rough types, the kind you'd cross the street to avoid in town. But they had money, you could tell by their horses and saddles. Dangerous men with resources. The worst combination, help you gentlemen? Mr. Peterson asked, his tone polite but not warm. The man in the middle, the obvious leader, pulled out a piece of paper. We're looking for a young woman. About 20 years old, dark hair, pretty face, might be injured. She ran away from home about 2 weeks ago and her family's desperate to find her. Thomas felt his heart start to race. He forced himself to stay calm to keep his expression neutral. Mr. Peterson studied the paper, then shook his head. Haven't seen anyone matching that description. What makes you think she'd be here? We're checking all the ranches and farms within 100 miles, another man said. Girl's father is worried sick. She's not in her right mind, you understand. Been acting strange. Needs to come home where she can be cared for properly. Thomas wanted to spit. He knew exactly what cared for properly meant. It meant dragging her back to Blackwood. It meant finishing what they'd started. Well, she's not here, Mr. Peterson said firmly. I've got 6 ranch hands and they would have told me if they'd seen a strange woman around. You're welcome to check the next property over, but I think you're wasting your time in these parts. The leader leaned forward in his saddle. You wouldn't be hiding her, would you? Because that could be seen as kidnapping. That's a serious crime. Mr. Peterson's face hardened. I don't appreciate the accusation. I've told you she's not here. Now I suggest you move along before you wear out your welcome. The men exchanged looks. The leader nodded slowly. We'll be checking every barn, every building in this area. If we find out you lied to us, there'll be trouble. No trouble here except what you bring with you, Mr. Peterson said coldly. Good day, gentlemen. Thomas watched the men ride away, but his relief was short-lived. They'd be back. They'd search every building like they said, and when they got to the barn, they'd find Grace. As soon as the riders were out of sight, Thomas ran to the barn. He climbed the ladder so fast he nearly slipped. Grace! He whispered urgently. She was in the corner, pressed against the wall, her face white as a sheet. She'd heard everything. They found me, she said, her voice shaking. They found me. Not yet, they haven't, Thomas said. But they will. They're going to search every building. Grace's eyes filled with tears. I have to run again. I have to— No, Thomas said firmly. He grabbed her hands, making her look at him. Listen to me. There's only one way to protect you. One legal way that even Blackwood can't get around. What are you talking about? Thomas took a deep breath. This was crazy. This was the most impulsive thing he'd ever done in his careful, practical life. But he knew it was right. He knew it in his bones. If you're married, you're not under your father's authority anymore. You're under your husband's protection. The arrangement your father made with Blackwood wouldn't matter. You'd be legally my wife, and they couldn't touch you. Grace stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You're asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to let me protect you the only way I know how, Thomas said. I know it's sudden. I know you barely know me. But Grace, I can't let them take you back to that monster. I won't. But you'd be stuck with me, Grace said, for the rest of your life. That's not fair to you. Thomas squeezed her hands gently. Let me worry about what's fair to me. The question is, do you trust me enough to do this? Grace's mind was clearly racing. Thomas could see 100 thoughts flashing through her eyes. Fear, confusion, hope, doubt. Finally she spoke. You'd really do this for me? Marry a woman you barely know? Thomas felt his heart pounding so hard he thought she might hear it. This was the moment. The moment to be honest, even if it scared him. Grace, I need to tell you something. These past 2 weeks, getting to know you, talking with you, watching you heal, I've come to care about you, more than I should probably admit. So this isn't just about protecting you, though that's part of it. This is me wanting to be the person who stands between you and anyone who'd hurt you, today, tomorrow, and every day after. Tears were streaming down Grace's face now. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave and kind. I know you've been through hell and came out stronger. I know when I'm with you, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He paused. "But I need you to understand this can be whatever you need it to be. If you just want protection, that's fine. We can have separate lives. I won't expect anything from you. I just want you safe." Grace looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that changed everything. "What if I want it to be real?" Thomas felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. "What?" "These past 2 weeks, you've been nothing but kind to me. Patient, gentle, you make me feel safe. You make me laugh. When I'm with you, I forget to be afraid." She wiped her tears. "I don't know if what I'm feeling is love or gratitude or just desperation, but I know I don't want to lose you. So if you're serious about this, if you really want to marry me, then yes." My answer is yes, Thomas didn't think. He just pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. She held him back just as tightly. "We'll do it today," Thomas said. "Right now. Before those men come back." They climbed down from the loft and found Mr. Peterson in his office. Thomas explained everything, leaving nothing out. He told him about finding Grace, about the abuse, about the men looking for her, and about his plan to marry her. Mr. Peterson listened to the whole story without interrupting. When Thomas finished, the older man was quiet for a moment. "That's quite a story, son," he finally said. "Yes, sir, and I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but I couldn't risk it." Mr. Peterson nodded slowly. "I understand, and I think you're doing the right thing." He stood up. "My late daughter was about your age, Grace. If someone had helped her when she needed it, maybe she'd still be here. So let's get you two married before those vultures come back." An hour later, they were in town. Reverend Matthews looked surprised when they showed up at his door, but he agreed to perform the ceremony. Mr. Peterson and his housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, served as witnesses. Thomas didn't have a ring, but then he remembered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. It had been his mother's, the only thing of hers his uncle had saved for him. "My mother's," he explained to Grace. "I've carried it with me since my uncle gave it to me. Figured I'd give it to my wife someday. Didn't think someday would be today, but here we are." Grace's eyes filled with tears again as he slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. The ceremony was simple. No fancy decorations, no big celebration. Just two people promising to stand by each other for better or worse. When Reverend Matthews said, "You may kiss your bride," Thomas looked at Grace for permission. She nodded and he kissed her softly, carefully, like she might break. But Grace kissed him back with surprising strength, and Thomas felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just legal protection anymore. This was real. They were really married. After the ceremony, Mr. Peterson pulled Thomas aside. "I'm giving you and your new wife the foreman's cabin. It's small, but it's yours. Consider it a wedding present." Thomas didn't know what to say. He'd been saving for years to buy his own land, and now he had a home to bring his wife to. As they walked to the cabin, Grace holding tight to Thomas's arm, he looked down at her. She looked scared still, but there was something else there now, too. Hope. "We'll make this work," Thomas promised her. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Grace looked up at him and smiled. A real smile, the first he'd seen from her. "Together," she agreed. That night, as they stood in the little cabin that was now their home, Thomas realized his life had completely changed in 2 weeks. He'd gone from a lonely ranch hand to a married man with someone to protect and care for, and he wouldn't have it any other way. The morning after their wedding, Thomas woke up on the floor near the fireplace. He'd insisted Grace take the cabin's only bedroom, saying he was used to sleeping rough anyway. Truth was, he didn't want to pressure her into anything. They might be married on paper, but he wanted her to feel safe and in control. Through the bedroom door, he could hear Grace moving around. A few minutes later, she emerged, wearing the simple dress Mrs. Chen had given her. Her hair was braided, and despite the fading bruises still on her face, she looked more rested than he'd ever seen her. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning," Thomas replied, standing up and folding his blanket. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in months." "That bed is comfortable," she paused. "But Thomas, you can't keep sleeping on the floor. Your back will give out." "I'm fine," he assured her. "Used to worse." Grace walked over to the small kitchen area, examining the simple setup. A wood stove, a few pots and pans, a small table with 2 chairs. "I could make breakfast," she offered, "if you show me what we have." Thomas showed her the supplies Mr. Peterson had stocked for them. Flour, eggs, bacon, coffee, some vegetables from the garden. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I should warn you, Grace said with a small smile. I'm not the best cook. The kitchen staff at home mostly shooed me away. Well, I'm not picky, and between the two of us we'll figure it out. Watching Grace move around the kitchen trying to work the unfamiliar stove, Thomas felt something warm settle in his chest. This was his wife. These were his mornings now. It felt surreal and right at the same time. The eggs came out a bit rubbery and the bacon was slightly burned, but Thomas ate every bite like it was the best meal he'd ever had. Grace laughed at his enthusiasm. You don't have to pretend it's good. I'm not pretending. It's perfect because you made it. After breakfast, Thomas headed out to work. He told Grace to rest, to settle in, to do whatever she needed. But when he came back for lunch, he found her working in the small garden plot behind the cabin. She'd cleared away weeds and was organizing the struggling plants. Couldn't sit still, she explained, wiping dirt from her hands. I like working with my hands. It helps me think, Thomas smiled. Then we'll get you some proper seeds. Make this garden something special. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Thomas would wake before dawn and kiss Grace's forehead before heading out, a gesture that felt natural despite their unusual situation. He'd work the ranch all day, coming home tired and dusty, and every single evening he'd find the cabin transformed a little more. Grace was a force of nature when she had a purpose. She sewed curtains from fabric Mrs. Chen gave her. She organized their small space until everything had a place. She learned to cook, getting better each day until Thomas was coming home to meals that actually made his mouth water. But more importantly, they talked. Really talked. Every evening, they'd sit on the small porch and share their days. Thomas would tell her about the horses, about the other ranch hands, about his plans for eventually buying land. Grace would tell him about the garden, about the book she was reading, about the memories of her mother that didn't hurt quite so much anymore. One evening, about a month after their wedding, Thomas came home to find Grace had prepared something special. The table was set nicely, there was a pie cooling by the window, and she'd even put wildflowers in a jar as a centerpiece. What's all this? Thomas asked, genuinely touched. It's been a month since we got married, Grace said. I wanted to celebrate. To thank you for everything you've done for me. Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. You don't need to thank me, Grace. Yes, I do. You saved my life, Thomas. Not just from Blackwood, but from giving up entirely. Before I met you, I thought I'd always be running, always be scared. But you gave me a home. You gave me hope. They ate dinner, and Grace's cooking had improved so much that Thomas genuinely couldn't believe it. The pie was amazing, sweet and tart at the same time. After dinner, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Grace moved closer to Thomas on the bench. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact beyond a brief touch here and there. Can I ask you something? She said quietly. Anything. Do you regret it? Marrying me so suddenly? Tying yourself to someone with so much trouble following them? Thomas turned to look at her, taking in her face in the golden evening light. The bruises were almost completely healed now. She looked healthy, strong, alive. Grace, marrying you is the best decision I've ever made. I meant every word I said in those vows, even though we barely knew each other, especially because of that. Most people spend years courting and still don't know if they're making the right choice. We jumped in with both feet, and every single day since has proven it was right. At least for me. Grace smiled, a full, genuine smile that made Thomas's heart skip. For me too. As the weeks turned into 2 months, their relationship deepened. Thomas found himself working harder than ever, driven by a desire to provide for Grace, to give her the life she deserved. He took on extra duties, talked to Mr. Peterson about a raise, and kept adding to his savings with renewed purpose. Grace, meanwhile, transformed the cabin into a real home. She hung pictures, made cushions for the chairs, planted herbs in the garden, but more than that, she transformed herself. The frightened, broken woman he'd found behind the barn was becoming someone new, someone confident and happy. One Saturday, they went into town together for supplies. It was Grace's first time being seen publicly as Thomas's wife, and he could feel her nervousness. Stay close to me, he murmured. I've got you. At the general store, some of the town ladies stared. They'd heard about the quick wedding, and small towns loved to gossip. But Mrs. Henderson, the store owner's wife, smiled warmly at Grace. So you're the one who finally caught Thomas Holloway, she said kindly. He's a good man. You're lucky to have each other. Grace relaxed a little. Yes, ma'am. I'm very lucky. Walking back to the wagon with their supplies, Thomas noticed Grace seemed lighter somehow. "You all right?" "Better than all right. I realized something in there. I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not that scared girl running in the night. I'm your wife. I have a place here. A life." Thomas stopped walking and pulled her into his arms, right there in the middle of the street. "You do. And I'm going to spend every day making sure you never forget it." That night, as Thomas prepared his bedroll by the fire, Grace stopped him. "Thomas, this is ridiculous. We're married. We share a life. We should share a bed." Thomas's heart started racing. "Grace, I don't want you to feel pressured." "I don't. I feel safe with you. I trust you completely. And honestly, I sleep better knowing you're close." She blushed. "I'm not saying... we don't have to. I just want you near me." Thomas understood. "Just sleeping. That's fine." "That's more than fine." That night, for the first time, Thomas slept in the bed. Grace curled up on her side and he stayed on his, a respectful distance between them. But sometime during the night, he woke to find her hand had reached across the space, resting near his. In his sleep, his hand had covered hers. It felt right. It felt like home. The next morning, they woke up closer than they'd fallen asleep, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. Neither of them mentioned it, but neither of them moved away either. Life continued to improve. Thomas got that raise from Mr. Peterson, who'd noticed his renewed dedication. Grace's garden flourished under her care, producing enough vegetables that she started trading with other ranch wives. They made friends, built a community, created a life together. 3 months after their wedding, Grace surprised Thomas with news that made his careful savings plan suddenly feel more important than ever. "I've been thinking," she said one evening, "about the land you want to buy. I have some money." "Grace, I'm not using your money. It's not my money. It's ours. We're married, remember? What's mine is yours." She pulled out her leather satchel, the one she'd been clutching that first day. Inside was a small pouch of coins. "My mother left this to me. My father never knew about it. I've been carrying it since I ran. It's not a lot, but combined with what you've saved, we could maybe afford a down payment on some land." Thomas stared at the money, then at Grace. "You'd want to do that? Start a ranch with me? I want to build a life with you. A real life. Not just surviving, but thriving. Together." Thomas pulled her close, overwhelmed by gratitude and love for this incredible woman. "Then let's do it. Let's build something that's ours." That night, they talked long into the darkness about their dreams. A small ranch of their own, maybe some cattle, definitely some horses, a bigger garden, maybe even someday children. As Grace fell asleep in his arms, Thomas looked out the window at the stars and thanked whatever force had led her to hide behind that barn. He'd found her at her lowest moment, but she'd given him more than he'd ever given her. She'd given him purpose. She'd given him love. She'd given him a future worth fighting for. And he'd spend the rest of his life making sure she never regretted saying yes to a simple cowboy's crazy proposal. 3 months into their marriage, Thomas and Grace had settled into something beautiful. They were no longer two separate people trying to coexist. They were a team, a partnership, a real married couple in every sense of the word. The awkwardness had melted away, replaced by comfortable intimacy and genuine love. Thomas had just finished his morning coffee when he heard the sound of horses. Multiple horses moving fast, his gut twisted. He stood up from the porch and saw 3 riders approaching, but behind them were 2 more. 5 men total, and he recognized the types immediately. Rich, powerful, used to getting their way. "Grace," he called, keeping his voice calm. "Stay inside." She appeared at the door, saw the riders, and her face went white. "Thomas, I know." "Stay inside. Lock the door." The riders pulled up in front of the cabin and Thomas stepped off the porch to meet them. The man in the center was clearly in charge. He was in his late 40s, well-dressed, with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. Victor Blackwood. Had to be. Next to him was an older man who looked like he'd been dragged through a rough life. Grace's father, most likely. He couldn't even meet Thomas's eyes. Behind them was a man with a sheriff's badge, though not from their county. And 2 more riders who looked like hired muscle. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Thomas asked, his voice steady despite the anger burning in his chest. Blackwood dismounted, looking at Thomas like he was something unpleasant stuck to his boot. "You're Thomas Holloway?" "I am. I'm Victor Blackwood. This is William Patterson, Grace's father. We're here to collect what belongs to me." Thomas felt his hands clench into fists. Nothing here belongs to you. That girl inside, Grace, she was promised to me. Her father and I had an arrangement. Blackwood's voice was smooth, confident, like he'd never been told no in his life. Had. Thomas emphasized. Past tense. Grace is my wife now. Legally married. That arrangement you had with her father is void. The sheriff stepped forward. I'm Sheriff Coleman from Blackwood County. I need to see proof of this marriage. Thomas had been expecting this. He pulled out the marriage certificate, which he'd started carrying with him every day just in case. Married 3 months ago by Reverend Matthews, right here in this county. All legal and proper. Sheriff Coleman examined the document and Thomas could see his face change. Whatever he'd been told, he hadn't expected this. This looks legitimate, the sheriff said to Blackwood. It's a fraud, Blackwood snapped. She was coerced. Probably kidnapped by this ranch hand and forced into marriage. Thomas's voice went cold. That's a serious accusation. You got any proof? I have a witness, Blackwood said, gesturing to Grace's father. William, tell them what happened. The older man finally looked up and Thomas could see the shame and weakness in his face. Grace ran away. This man must have taken advantage of her. Before Thomas could respond, the cabin door opened. Grace stepped out and Thomas wanted to tell her to go back inside, but the look on her face stopped him. She was scared, yes, but she was also angry, righteously angry. That's a lie, Father, Grace said, her voice shaking but strong. And you know it. Grace, sweetheart, her father started. Don't. Grace walked down the steps to stand beside Thomas. Don't you dare call me sweetheart. You sold me. You sold your own daughter to pay off your gambling debts. I was trying to provide for you, William protested weakly. You were trying to save yourself. Grace turned to Blackwood, and Thomas had never been more proud of her. You locked me in a room. You hit me. You told me you'd break me until I learned to obey you like a good wife should. So I ran, I escaped. And I found a man who treated me with kindness and respect. A man who asked me to marry him to protect me, and I said yes. Nobody forced me. Nobody coerced me. I chose Thomas, and I'd choose him again every single day. Blackwood's face had gone red. You little... Careful, Thomas said, his voice dangerous. That's my wife you're talking to. At that moment, Mr. Peterson rode up with 4 of his ranch hands. He'd clearly seen the commotion from the main house. The local sheriff, Sheriff Morrison, was with them too. What's going on here? Sheriff Morrison asked, dismounting. These men are harassing my ranch hand and his wife, Mr. Peterson said firmly. On my property. Blackwood turned to the local sheriff. This woman was promised to me. Her father and I had a legal arrangement. Nobody belongs to anyone, Sheriff Morrison interrupted. This is 1887, not the Dark Ages. And from what I understand, these two are legally married. You got proof otherwise? Sheriff Coleman from Blackwood County handed over the marriage certificate. Morrison examined it, then looked at Grace. Ma'am, were you forced into this marriage in any way? No, sir, Grace said clearly. I married Thomas willingly. Gratefully. He saved my life. There you have it, Morrison said, handing the certificate back to Thomas. The marriage is legal and binding. The young lady is of age and made her choice freely. You gentlemen from Blackwood County have no jurisdiction here, and I suggest you move along. This isn't over, Blackwood said, his voice dripping with rage. I have lawyers. I have influence. I'll make both your lives miserable. Thomas stepped forward, getting right in Blackwood's face. You come near my wife again and lawyers won't help you. I don't care how rich you are or how many men you hire. You touch her. You threaten her. You so much as look at her wrong and I'll make sure you regret it. For a moment, Thomas thought Blackwood might actually take a swing at him. But then the man seemed to realize he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. He turned to his horse, then looked back at Grace's father. You're worthless, just like your daughter. William Patterson flinched but said nothing. Grace didn't even look at him. As Blackwood and his men rode away, Grace's father lingered. He looked at his daughter with something that might have been regret. Grace, just go, Father, Grace said quietly. You made your choice. I've made mine. William opened his mouth like he wanted to say more, then thought better of it. He climbed on his horse and followed the others, looking back once before disappearing down the road. As soon as they were gone, Grace's strength seemed to leave her. Her knees buckled and Thomas caught her, holding her up. It's okay, he murmured. You're okay? They're gone. He'll come back, Grace said, shaking. You heard him. He said this isn't over. Let him come, Thomas said fiercely. Let him try. You're my wife, Grace, legally, morally, in every way that matters, and I will not let him hurt you. I promise you that. Mr. Peterson put a hand on Thomas's shoulder. You two come up to the house. Let's have some coffee and talk about this properly. In Mr. Peterson's sitting room, Grace finally broke down. The fear and stress she'd been holding back came pouring out in tears. Thomas held her, letting her cry, while Mr. Peterson and Sheriff Morrison discussed the situation. Legally, he can't touch her, Morrison said. The marriage is valid, but Blackwood has money and connections. He could make trouble. Then we'll be ready for it, Mr. Peterson said. Thomas is one of my best men, and Grace is part of this community now. We protect our own. Over the next hour, they made a plan. Sheriff Morrison would keep an eye out for any legal challenges. Mr. Peterson would ask around about Blackwood, find out what kind of man they were dealing with, and Thomas would make sure Grace was never alone and unprotected. That evening, back in their cabin, Grace was quiet. Thomas could see her mind working, processing everything that had happened. I'm sorry, she finally said. For what? For bringing all this trouble to your door. Your life was simple before me. Now you've got a rich man threatening you. Legal troubles possibly coming, all because... Thomas put his finger gently on her lips. Stop, don't you dare apologize for surviving. For fighting back. For choosing life over what they wanted to make you. But you could get hurt because of me. Grace, look at me. Thomas took her face in his hands. You want to know the truth? Before you, I was just existing. Working, saving money, planning for some future that always felt far away. But you gave me something to fight for. Someone to protect. A reason to build something real. You didn't ruin my life. You saved it. Tears streamed down Grace's face. I love you, she said. I know we got married quick, and maybe it was too soon to know, but I do. I love you, Thomas. Thomas felt his own eyes getting wet. I love you too. From that first day when I saw you scared and hurt but still fighting, still surviving, I knew you were special, and every day since has just proven it more. They held each other as night fell, finding comfort and strength in each other's arms. The confrontation with Blackwood had been terrifying, but it had also shown them something important. They weren't alone. They had each other. They had friends. They had a community willing to stand with them. That night, lying in bed with Grace wrapped in his arms, Thomas made a silent vow. Whatever came next, whatever Blackwood tried to do, he'd protect his wife. She'd been through enough. She deserved peace, happiness, a life without fear. And he'd make sure she got it, no matter what it cost him. Thomas, Grace whispered in the darkness. Yeah? Thank you for standing up for me today. For not backing down. Thomas kissed the top of her head. Always, that's what husbands do. No, Grace said softly. That's what good men do. And I'm lucky enough to have married one. As Grace's breathing evened out in sleep, Thomas stayed awake a while longer, listening to the night sounds outside there. The days following Blackwood's visit were tense. Grace jumped at every unexpected sound. Thomas found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, watching the roads for riders. Even the simple joy they'd built together felt fragile now, like it could shatter at any moment. A week passed with no sign of trouble. Then 2 weeks. But instead of relaxing, Grace seemed to get more anxious. Thomas would wake up in the middle of the night to find her staring out the window, watching for shadows that might be coming for her. One night, about 3 weeks after the confrontation, Thomas woke to an empty bed. He found Grace on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars. Her face was wet with tears. Grace. He sat down beside her, pulling her close. What's wrong? I can't stop thinking about it, she whispered. About what he said. That this isn't over. What if he hurts you, Thomas? What if trying to protect me gets you killed? That's not going to happen. You don't know that. Grace turned to face him, her eyes desperate. He has money, power, men who'll do whatever he says. And we're just what? Just two people trying to build a life? Just a husband protecting his wife? Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. Grace, I knew what I was signing up for when I asked you to marry me. But you didn't really. You thought it would be simple. Legal protection, and that would be it. You didn't know he'd show up with threats and lawyers and... Stop. Thomas took her hands, making her look at him. I need to tell you something. Something I should have said clearly from the start. Grace went still, waiting. Thomas took a deep breath. This was it. The moment to be completely honest, even if it scared him. especially because it scared him. When I asked you to marry me, I told you it could be just for protection, that I wouldn't expect anything from you. That was true, I meant it, but what I didn't say, what I was too scared to admit, was that I already loved you. Grace's breath caught. From that first day, when I saw you hiding behind the barn, something in me recognized you, like my soul had been waiting for you and just didn't know it until you were there. Every day we spent together, every conversation, every smile, every time you started to trust me a little more, I fell deeper in love with you. By the time I proposed, I wasn't just trying to protect you. I was trying to keep you in my life because I couldn't imagine it without you anymore. Tears were streaming down Grace's face now. Thomas, let me finish, he said softly. You're worried about bringing trouble to my door, about me getting hurt because of you. But Grace, you're not understanding. You didn't ruin my life or complicate it. You saved it. Before you, I was just going through the motions. Work, eat, sleep, save money for some dream that felt empty because I had no one to share it with. You gave me purpose. You gave me hope. You gave me a future worth having. But what if loving me gets you killed? Grace sobbed. I couldn't live with that. Thomas cupped her face in his hands, making her meet his eyes. Then we'll die together, old and gray, surrounded by grandchildren we haven't even had yet. Because, Grace, I'm not going anywhere. Blackwood doesn't scare me. His threats don't scare me. The only thing that scares me is the thought of you living in fear for the rest of your life, not believing that you deserve to be happy. I'm scared all the time, Grace admitted. I'm scared he'll find a way to take me back. I'm scared he'll hurt you. I'm scared I'll wake up one day and this will all have been a dream. It's not a dream. It's real. We're real. Thomas pulled her into his arms. And I'm going to tell you something every day until you believe it. You are my wife. You are safe. You are loved. And no one, not Blackwood, not your father, not anyone is going to take that away from us. Grace clung to him, crying into his shoulder. I love you so much. So much it terrifies me. Good, Thomas said, a smile in his voice despite the seriousness of the moment. Love should be a little terrifying. It means it matters. It means it's worth fighting for. They sat there on the porch until the sky started to lighten with dawn, holding each other, talking about everything they'd been too scared to say before. Grace told him about the nightmares she'd been having, about waking up thinking she was back in that locked room. Thomas told her about his own fears, about feeling like he wasn't enough for her, like she deserved someone with more to offer. You're enough, Grace said fiercely. You're more than enough. You're everything. As the sun rose, painting the sky pink and gold, something shifted between them. The last walls they'd been keeping up, the last bits of protection and guardedness fell away. They'd been married for 3 months, but in that moment they truly became one. Thomas stood up, pulling Grace to her feet. Come on. I want to show you something. He led her to the small barn behind their cabin where they kept their few chickens and his horse. In the back corner was a chest he'd been working on for weeks, staying up late after Grace fell asleep. I was going to wait until your birthday, but I think you need this now, Thomas said. Opening the chest, inside were beautiful things. A dress he'd commissioned from the town seamstress, made of soft blue fabric that matched Grace's eyes. A set of hair combs carved from wood, delicate and lovely. A journal with a leather cover for her to write in. And at the bottom, wrapped carefully, was a framed drawing. Grace picked it up with shaking hands. It was a sketch of a small house surrounded by gardens and with mountains in the background. What is this? She whispered. Our future, Thomas said. I've been talking to Mr. Peterson. There's a piece of land about 10 miles from here, near the river. 20 acres. It's not much, but with what I've saved and what you contributed, we can afford it. We can build a house there, a real house, with a big kitchen for you to cook in and a porch where we can watch the sunsets. We can have horses, maybe some cattle, a big garden, a life that's really ours. Grace looked from the drawing to Thomas, her eyes wide. You've been planning this? Every day. I think about our future every single day, about the life we're going to build, the family we might have someday, growing old together. He took the frame from her hands and set it aside, then took her hands in his. That's why I'm not scared of Blackwood, because I know where we're heading. I can see it so clearly, and nothing he does can stop that unless we let it. I want that, Grace said, her voice breaking. I want that life with you so badly. Then let's stop being scared and start making it happen. Thomas kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Let's choose to believe in our future instead of living in fear of the past. That day marked a turning point. Grace made a decision to stop letting fear control her life. She started going into town with Thomas, meeting more of the community, making friends with other ranch wives. She still had moments of anxiety, but she fought through them. Thomas, seeing her courage, found his own strength multiplying. He worked harder than ever, driven by the dream of that house by the river. He talked to Mr. Peterson about buying the land, started making actual plans instead of just vague hopes. One evening, about 2 weeks after their conversation on the porch, Grace surprised Thomas with her own announcement. "I've been thinking," she said over dinner, "about Blackwood, about my father, about all of it." Thomas set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "I've spent so much time running from them, hiding from them, being scared of them. But you know what? They don't deserve that much space in my life. My father made his choices. Blackwood showed who he really is. And I made my choice too. I chose you. I chose this life. And I'm not going to let them steal my happiness anymore." Thomas felt pride swell in his chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done being scared. If Blackwood comes back, we'll deal with it together. If he tries to cause legal trouble, we'll fight it. Together. But I'm not going to spend another day of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for something bad to happen. I'm going to look forward. At our future. At that house by the river. At the life we're building." Thomas stood up and pulled Grace into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. She laughed, a real joyful laugh that filled their little cabin with light. "That's my girl," Thomas said, setting her down but keeping her close. "That's my brave, strong, amazing wife." That night, for the first time since Blackwood's visit, they both slept deeply and peacefully. No nightmares, no waking up scared. Just two people wrapped up in each other, secure in their love and their shared future. The next morning, Thomas woke to find Grace already up, humming as she made breakfast. The sound filled his heart to bursting. This was what he'd been fighting for, not just her safety but her happiness, her peace, her ability to be fully herself without fear. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked, catching him watching her with that dopey smile on his face. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," Thomas said honestly. "How I found the most incredible woman in the world hiding behind a barn and somehow convinced her to marry me." Grace walked over and kissed him soundly. "You didn't convince me. You showed me what real love looks like. Patient, kind, strong, protective. Everything love should be." "Well, you showed me what courage looks like," Thomas replied. "Surviving what you survived, escaping, building a new life, facing down your demons. You're the brave one, Grace. Then we make a good team," Grace said with a smile. "You give me strength, I give you courage." 6 months had passed since Thomas found Grace behind the barn. 6 months that felt like both a lifetime and no time at all. Winter was coming to Montana, bringing cold winds and the promise of snow. But inside the cabin Thomas and Grace shared, everything was warm. The fear that had plagued them after Blackwood's visit had faded into something more manageable. They'd heard nothing from him in months. Sheriff Morrison kept them informed, telling them that Blackwood had apparently moved on, married some banker's daughter from back east. Whether it was true or not, they chose to believe it. Chose to focus on building rather than worrying. Thomas came home one evening to find Grace sitting at the table with papers spread out in front of her. She had a pencil in her hand and was doing calculations, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration the way it always did when she was focused. "What's all this?" Thomas asked, hanging up his coat. Grace looked up with sparkling eyes. "I've been thinking about the land. The 20 acres by the river, yeah?" Thomas felt his heart rate pick up. They'd been talking about it for months, but talking was all they'd done. The dream always felt just out of reach. "I think we can do it," Grace said, gesturing to the papers. "Look, we have your savings plus what I had from my mother. Mr. Peterson said he'd be willing to give you a loan for the rest to be paid back over 5 years. The numbers work, Thomas. We can actually buy that land." Thomas sat down heavily in the chair beside her, looking at the figures she'd carefully written out. His wife had a head for numbers he'd never suspected. She'd calculated everything. The cost of the land, building materials for a house, animals, seed for crops with enough left over for emergencies. "You really think we can do this?" he asked, hardly daring to hope. "I know we can," Grace said firmly. "We're both hard workers. We're smart. We're careful with money. And Thomas, I want this. I want our own place. I want to build something that's really ours. Thomas looked at his wife, at the determination in her eyes, at the confidence that had grown in her over these months. The scared, broken woman from behind the barn was gone, replaced by someone strong and sure of herself. Someone who believed in their future. Then let's do it, Thomas said. Let's buy that land. Grace threw her arms around his neck, laughing with joy. Really? You mean it? I've never meant anything more in my life. The next week, they met with Mr. Peterson and the landowner. By the end of the meeting, they had a deed with both their names on it. 20 acres of Montana land, with a river running through it and mountains in the distance. It was the most beautiful piece of earth Thomas had ever seen. Standing on their new property, Grace beside him, Thomas felt like he could take on the world. We'll build the house here, Grace said, pointing to a flat area with good sun exposure and a view of the river, and the barn over there. The garden can go on this side where it gets morning light. Thomas pulled her close. You've got it all planned out, don't you? I've been planning this in my head for months, Grace admitted. Every detail. Where every room will be, what color curtains I'll make, where we'll put the rocking chair for when we're old. And what about kids? Thomas asked, surprising himself with the boldness of the question. Grace looked up at him, her cheeks pink. What about them? Just wondering if you'd planned for them too. In this dream house of yours? Maybe, Grace said softly. A couple of rooms upstairs. Big enough for at least 2 or 3. Thomas's heart felt like it might burst. 2 or 3 sounds perfect. They spent every free moment on their land that winter. When Thomas wasn't working for Mr. Peterson, he was out there clearing space for the house, marking boundaries, planning. Grace would bring him lunch and they'd sit together, talking about their plans, their dreams, their future. One cold December afternoon, Grace came running to find Thomas in the barn where he was working. Her face was flushed with excitement, or maybe something else. Thomas, I need to tell you something. He dropped his tools immediately, worried by the look on her face. What's wrong? Are you okay? I'm fine. Better than fine. Grace took his hands. Thomas, I'm going to have a baby. Time seemed to stop. Thomas stared at her, trying to process the words. A baby? Yes, I've been feeling odd for a few weeks, and I finally went to see Doc Miller in town. He confirmed it. We're going to have a baby, Thomas. Thomas didn't even realize he was crying until Grace wiped the tears from his cheeks. He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully like she might break. We're having a baby, he repeated, wonder in his voice. Are you happy? Grace asked, though she was smiling like she already knew the answer. Happy? Grace, I'm beyond happy. I'm terrified and thrilled and amazed and just, wow, we're having a baby. That night they lay in bed making new plans. They'd need to finish the house before the baby came. They'd need furniture, baby clothes, supplies. It seemed overwhelming but exciting too. What should we name them? Grace asked, her hand resting on her still flat belly. If it's a boy, maybe something strong like, I don't know. What do you think? And if it's a girl? Grace prompted. Thomas thought for a moment. Hope. If we have a daughter, I want to name her Hope because that's what you gave me. That's what this baby represents. Hope for the future. Grace smiled and kissed him softly. Hope, I love it. The news of the baby lit a fire under Thomas. He worked like a man possessed, determined to have their house built before Grace's belly got too big. Mr. Peterson, hearing the news, gave him more time off to work on the house and even sent some of the other ranch hands to help. The community rallied around them in a way that brought tears to Grace's eyes. The women in town threw her a small celebration, bringing baby clothes they'd made and advice they'd stored up. The men helped Thomas raise the frame of the house, working together like it was the most natural thing in the world. By early spring, the house was done. It wasn't huge or fancy, but it was solid and well built. 2 bedrooms upstairs, a big kitchen and living area downstairs, a covered porch, and a barn out back. It was everything they'd dreamed of and more. The day they moved in, Grace walked through every room with tears in her eyes. It's perfect, she kept saying. It's absolutely perfect. Wait, Thomas said. One more thing. He went outside and came back carrying a small rose bush in a pot. I bought this in town. Thought you could plant it by the front door. Something beautiful to welcome people home. Grace took the rose bush carefully. It's lovely. But why a rose bush specifically? Roses are tough, Thomas explained. They've got thorns to protect themselves, but they produce something beautiful. Reminds me of you, strong enough to survive hard things, but still able to create beauty and joy. Grace set the rose bush down and walked into his arms. "How did I get so lucky?" she whispered. "I ask myself the same thing every day," Thomas replied. They planted the rose bush together that afternoon, patting the soil around it and giving it water. It wasn't much to look at yet, just a small plant with a few leaves. But like their marriage, like their new home, like the baby growing in Grace's belly, it was full of promise. As spring turned to summer, Grace's belly grew round. Thomas would catch her standing by the window, hands on her stomach, talking softly to the baby. She glowed with happiness, all traces of the frightened woman from behind the barn completely gone. One evening in late June, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when a rider approached. Thomas tensed immediately, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle he now kept near the door, but it was just Sheriff Morrison and he was smiling. "Evening, folks," he called out. "Got some news I thought you'd want to hear." "What's that, Sheriff?" Thomas asked, helping Grace to her feet. "Victor Blackwood won't be bothering you anymore. He got arrested last week. Turns out he's been involved in some shady land deals, fraud, extortion. The law finally caught up with him. He's looking at serious prison time." Grace grabbed Thomas's arm, her eyes wide. "Really, you're sure?" "Positive. Got it straight from the judge. Blackwood's done. His empire's crumbling and he won't be in a position to threaten anyone for a very long time." After the sheriff left, Grace turned to Thomas with tears streaming down her face. "It's really over. He can't hurt us anymore." "It was already over," Thomas said gently. "The moment you chose to stop being afraid, it was over. This is just confirmation." That night they made love tenderly, carefully, celebrating not just the news about Blackwood, but everything they'd built together. Their home, their love, their growing family, their future that finally felt secure. As summer progressed, Grace prepared for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny clothes, washed and folded them carefully. She and Thomas painted the smaller bedroom upstairs in soft yellow, a color that would work for either a boy or girl. They built a cradle together, Thomas doing the woodwork while Grace made the bedding. The garden Grace had planted flourished under her care. Despite her growing belly making it harder to bend down, she insisted on tending it herself. Thomas would find her out there in the cool mornings talking to the plants like they were old friends. The vegetables grew strong and healthy, and Grace started preserving food for the winter, filling their pantry with jars of pickles, jams, and canned vegetables. "We're really doing it," Grace said one evening as they surveyed their full pantry. "We're building a real life here." 5 years had passed since that August day, when Thomas found Grace hiding behind the barn. 5 years that had transformed two broken, lonely people into a thriving family with a life full of purpose and joy. Thomas stood on his porch, watching the sunrise paint the Montana sky in shades of pink and gold. The ranch had grown beyond his wildest dreams. What started as 20 acres now included another 40 he'd been able to purchase with profits from their successful harvests. They had a small herd of cattle, horses, chickens, and enough crops to sell at market while still feeding themselves comfortably. The house had grown too. They'd added another room downstairs and expanded the upstairs when their second child came along. Little Samuel was 3 now, a bundle of energy with his father's dark hair and his mother's bright spirit. And just 6 months ago they'd welcomed another daughter, Rose, named after the bush that still bloomed faithfully by their front door every year. "Papa, Papa." Hope came running out onto the porch, her dark braids flying behind her. At 5 years old, she was fearless and curious, always asking questions and exploring everything. "Mama says breakfast is ready. And Sammy won't stop trying to feed Rose his porridge." Thomas laughed and scooped his daughter up, making her squeal with delight. "Well, we better go rescue your sister then." Inside, the kitchen was warm and filled with the smell of fresh bread and coffee. Grace stood at the stove, baby Rose balanced on her hip while she stirred a pot with her free hand. Samuel sat at the table, porridge smeared across his chubby cheeks, looking very pleased with himself. "Morning, wife," Thomas said, kissing Grace's cheek and taking Rose from her. "Need help?" "I've got it," Grace assured him, but her smile told him she appreciated the offer. "Just keep our son from wearing more breakfast than he eats." Thomas wiped Samuel's face while Grace dished out breakfast. This was his favorite time of day, the 6 of them together, the children chattering, Grace humming as she worked, the morning sun streaming through the windows of the home they'd built with their own hands. After breakfast, Thomas headed out to work the land while Grace managed the household and the children. But it wasn't the lonely work it used to be. Hope often followed him around, asking endless questions about the horses and the crops. Samuel, when he wasn't napping, would toddle after his big sister, determined not to be left out of anything. Around mid-morning, Thomas saw a wagon approaching. He recognized it immediately as belonging to Daniel and Helen, their closest neighbors and dear friends. Their son, Jack, now 5 like Hope, was practically her best friend. The two families helped each other constantly, sharing equipment, watching each other's children, celebrating good times, and supporting through hard ones. "Morning, Thomas," Daniel called out. "Helen's got some preserves for Grace, and I was hoping to borrow your plow if you're done with the north field." "All yours," Thomas said, shaking his friend's hand. "Coffee's probably still hot if you want some." The men walked to the house together, talking about the weather and the upcoming harvest. Inside, they found Grace and Helen already deep in conversation, while the children played together on the floor. Rose was in her cradle, sleeping peacefully. This was the life they'd built. Not just a house and land, but a community, friendships, connections, a place where they belonged. That afternoon, while the children napped, Thomas and Grace found a rare moment alone. They sat on the porch swing Thomas had built last summer, gently rocking back and forth. "I was thinking," Grace said, leaning her head on Thomas's shoulder, "about that first year. How scared I was all the time. How I couldn't imagine ever feeling safe again. And now," Thomas prompted, wrapping his arm around her, "now I can't remember the last time I felt afraid. This life we've built, Thomas. It's better than anything I could have dreamed of back then." Thomas thought about the scared, bruised woman he'd found hiding, about the long journey from that moment to this one. It hadn't always been easy. There had been hard winters, failed crops one year, illnesses that scared them, moments of doubt and struggle, but they'd faced everything together, and somehow that made even the hard times bearable. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Thomas said. "I think about if I'd made a different choice that day. If I'd just told you to move along, kept my head down, minded my own business like most people would, my whole life would be different. No you, no Hope, no Samuel, no Rose, just me, still working someone else's land, still saving for a dream that felt empty." "But you didn't make that choice," Grace said softly. "You chose kindness. You chose to help someone who needed it, even though it could have brought you trouble. That says everything about who you are. And you chose to trust me, to take a chance on a stranger, to build this life with me even when you had every reason to be afraid of men, of marriage, of everything. That says everything about who you are." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their land stretch out before them. The fields were golden with wheat ready for harvest. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. The garden was bursting with vegetables. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd dreamed of had come to life. That evening, after the children were in bed, Grace pulled out a letter that had arrived that afternoon. Thomas recognized the handwriting and felt a small chill. "It's from my father," Grace said quietly. "He's dying, wants to see me before he passes." Thomas's first instinct was to say no, to protect Grace from the man who'd sold her like property, but he waited, letting her process. "I don't know if I want to go," Grace admitted. "Part of me thinks he doesn't deserve my forgiveness or my time. But another part thinks about how I'd feel if I didn't go and then it was too late." "What does your heart say?" Thomas asked. Grace was quiet for a long moment. "That people make mistakes. That he was weak and broken after my mother died and he made terrible choices. But that maybe, if he truly is dying, there could be peace and forgiveness. Not for him. For me? Then I'll come with you," Thomas said firmly. "If you want to go, we'll go together. The children can stay with Helen and Daniel for a few days." A week later, they made the journey to Grace's hometown, a place she hadn't seen in over 5 years. Her father was in a boarding house, too poor now to afford anything better. The gambling and drinking had taken everything from him. William Patterson looked like he'd aged 20 years. His face was gaunt, his body frail. When Grace entered the room, tears immediately sprang to his eyes. "Grace," he whispered, "you came." "I came," Grace said, her voice steady, though Thomas could feel her hand trembling in his. "I don't deserve it. I don't deserve your time or your forgiveness. What I did to you." William broke down, sobbing. "I sold my own daughter. I let that monster hurt you. I chose whiskey and cards over my own child. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Thomas wanted to stay angry at this man, but looking at him now, broken and dying and filled with regret, he mostly felt pity. Grace sat down beside her father's bed. I'm not going to tell you it's okay because it wasn't. What you did hurt me deeply. But I also can't carry that anger anymore, Father. It's too heavy. So I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free of it. William reached for Grace's hand. You look happy, healthy, are you? I'm very happy, Grace said. I have a good husband who treats me with love and respect. We have 3 beautiful children. We own our own land. We built a good life together. That's all I wanted for you, William said, crying again. After your mother died, I lost my way. I lost everything that mattered. But you found your way. You're stronger than I ever was. They stayed for an hour talking quietly. Grace told her father about her children, her home, her life. William listened with tears streaming down his face, hearing about the daughter he'd almost destroyed but who had survived and thrived. When they left, Grace cried in the wagon. Thomas held her, letting her release all the complicated emotions. Grief for the father he could have been. Relief that she'd chosen forgiveness. Gratitude for the life she had now. You did a good thing today, Thomas told her. I did it for me, Grace said. I needed to let it go. To close that chapter completely. Now I can move forward without that weight. Her father passed away 2 weeks later. Grace mourned, but it was a clean grief. She'd made peace with him and with that part of her past. The letter she received from the boarding house owner included one final note from her father. Tell my daughter I died grateful that she survived my failures and built something beautiful. She deserved better than me, but I'm glad she found it. Back home, life continued its beautiful, ordinary rhythm. The harvest was good that year, one of their best. They celebrated with a party, inviting all their neighbors and friends. The house was filled with music and laughter and the sound of children playing. Standing in the middle of the celebration, watching Grace dance with Hope while Samuel clung to his legs and Rose slept in Mrs. Chen's arms, Thomas felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Not just for what he had, but for every choice that had led him here. That night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Thomas and Grace walked out to look at their land one more time. The stars were brilliant overhead and the air was cool and sweet with the smell of harvest. I want you to know something, Thomas said, pulling Grace close. You saved me just as much as I saved you. Maybe more.